Wilhelm Institute press release. Who's Who in the Golden Tip? Amsterdam, December 11th, 2009. The advanced English edition of the Golden Tip, The Entanglement of the Upper and Underworld, and the Murder of Gerrit-Jan Heijn, by Slobodan Radijev Mitric, known in the Netherlands as Karate Bob, has just come off the press. The more than 500 pages of this autobiographical true crime and love story by the former Yugoslav secret agent, later World Atomic Counter-Espionage agent, karate master of the 10th Dan, and prolific author. These 500 pages are filled with an impressive array of famous and infamous, lesser and hitherto unknown figures and organizations from the upper and underworld on both sides of the Atlantic during the 80s of the last century. Heading the bill in the New World are President Reagan and his wife Nancy, Vice President George Bush Sr., and members of their cabinet such as Chief of Staff Donald Reagan, Secretary of State Alexander Haig, Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger, and CIA General Director William Casey, some of whom are gathered in the Oval Office of the White House in order to investigate who has secretly been using the red phone from an exterior source that has been traced to the Netherlands. Commissioned by President Reagan to carry out the investigation into the phantom phone, in parentheses, are General Raymond Healy, CIA Director for Europe and Asia, founder of Reserve Police International, RPI, and founder of World Atomic Counter-Espionage, and his American-Serbian deputy, Dr. Milorad Markovic. They in turn delegate this investigation to the European Director of Reserve Police International, a certain Dr. Troublemaker, a pseudonym for the author, Slobodan Mitric, stationed in Amsterdam, whose foster father is General Healy. American politicians, Senator Bob Dole, Congressman Phil Crane, Governor Clifton Finch of Mississippi, and U.S. Ambassador in The Hague, Paul Bremer, and Mafia boss Meyer Lansky complete the bill. Not included in this lineup are the various personages not explicitly mentioned by name in the book, such as Colonel Oliver North. At the top of the list in the Old World, the reader will either in the novel itself or in the 2 open letters by Slobodan Mitric and the 12 appendices encounter in one way or another during the same period the following persons: Iris de Vries, artist and fiancée of the author, to whom he has dedicated his Truth is Stranger Than Fiction novel; Queen Beatrix, who is the recipient of an open letter by the author on the true reasons for his presence in her kingdom; then her father, Prince Bernhard, called the White Carnation; her husband, Prince Klaus; and their first son, Crown Prince Willem Alexander, heir to the Dutch throne, who was the initial target of the criminal gang involved in this kidnapping case that is foiled by the author. One of the hitherto completely unknown developments in this case, that the Crown Prince himself, during a recent visit to New York, has reportedly shrugged off as mere fantasy. Then, of course, Ahold topman Gerrit-Jan Heijn, the man who was murdered; his brother Albert Heijn, a household name in the Netherlands because of a nationwide chain of supermarkets bearing his name; Heijn's widow, Hank Heijn, author, in parentheses, of the book Reconciliation, in which she not only reconciles with the person falsely considered to be solely responsible and jailed as such for the death of her husband, namely the electrical engineer Ferdi Elzas, but also describes the one who attempted to save the life of her husband, namely Karate Bob, as a known killer and rapist, in parentheses, who claimed to have a, in parentheses, golden tip on the abductors of her husband. Also, she is the recipient of an open letter by the author asking her why she slanders the one that attempted to save the life of her husband, and, after that failed, advised the Hein family not to pay the ransom, again to no avail. Dutch Prime Minister Ruud Lubbers, members of his cabinet, such as Attorney General Job de Ruiter and Minister of Foreign Affairs Hans van den Broek, and various intermediaries such as Jos Kieboom and Master Conman Arie Oliver, in connection with a still unresolved and smoldering plutonium-uranium scandal around the Pakistan nuclear scientist Dr. Qadar Khan and the Palestinian businessman Hassan Zubaidi. Further mentioned, alluded to, or playing a supporting or minor role in this cast of thousands, in parentheses, are Pope John Paul II, heads of state such as Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme, Yugoslav Marshal Tito, then generals such as the Serbian resistance leader Draza Mihailovic, then the Libyan dictator Colonel Gaddafi, then Dutch resistance heroes Hans Stenck Gerritsen, who was the founder of the first post-World War II Dutch Secret Service, and his friend Erik Hazelhoff Roelfsema, fighter pilot and soldier of Orange, and other heads and members of various Dutch secret services, such as Vice Admirals Henk Bos and Frans van Alkemade. And then Amsterdam Police Commissioner Gerard Torrenaar and his former deputy Kees Sietsma, the brain behind the kidnapping of Gerrit-Jan Hein, please note this, as well as the head of the crisis team investigating it, on whom the Queen in 1987, on the recommendation of the Ministry of Justice, bestowed the Order of Orange Nassau, one of the most distinguished medals in the Netherlands. Then Federal Chief Prosecutor in Amsterdam, Leo de Wit, who confronts Dr. Troublemaker at the end of the book with the choice of either divulging the name of the abductors of Ahold Topman Hein or being charged with rape. And in this connection, Susan Coy, the Matahari, who filed one of the 3 trumped-up charges of rape that supposedly took place in a gypsy scholars caravan behind the Amsterdam Zoo, and for which the author was found guilty in a show trial and sentenced to a jail term by a judge, R.H., see Chapter 49, a judge under suspicion of high treason and having connections with a super-secret organization called Titans. Then politicians of various shades, such as Colonel Ed Ploeg and Ben Hennekam, criminal lawyers and jurists such as Kees Corvinus, Luc Hamer and Victor Lebesque, law professor and former president of Amnesty International in Amsterdam, Frits Ruter, his colleague, Dr. Marius Broekmeyer, head of the Amsterdam Eastern Europe Institute, and then beer magnate and captain of industry Fred Heineken, as member of a secret powerful group of industrialists and politicians called the G10, that includes the real estate owner and multi-millionaire Maup Carranza, who staged his own kidnapping for tax evasion purposes. Then we have novelists such as Harry Mulisch and Luc van Splunteren, author of The Amsterdam Mafia, and one of the many informers of Dr. Troublemaker. Joep van het Hek, one of Holland's favorite comics. Then newspaper editors and crime reporters such as Rolf Ridderikoff and Peter R. de Vries, who rose to fame in the U.S. in connection with the Natalie Holloway case. Then, of course, there are the underworld figures, real or perceived, such as General Pistol Paul, self-crowned king of the Amsterdam underworld and international drugs boss Klaas Bruinsma, his bodyguard André Brilleman, named Kickboxer, and Frans de Wit, alias Papa Blanca, nephew of Leo de Wit. Then locals, terrorists such as René, Kees, Jasper and Roy. The Belgian Patrick Hamers, with connections to the still unidentified bloody gang of Nijvel, and Nazi Dr. Joseph Mengele. Last but not least, the reader will come across a number of anthroposophists, such as the Austrian visionary and spiritual scientist Rudolf Steiner, founder of the Anthroposophical Society in Dornach, Switzerland, Manfred Schmidt-Brabant, the then president of this society, and former member of the German Abwehr, who is approached for information concerning a Robert Jan Kelder, Dutch-Canadian singer-songwriter and gypsy scholar, who, at first suspected of being a RAF German terrorist, becomes Dr. Troublemaker's friend, trusted advisor, and landlord. And finally then, Werner Groeb, the Swiss author of How the Grail Sites Were Found, a book on which the gypsy scholar gives lectures in his caravan behind the Amsterdam Zoo, and Herbert Witzemann, German author of the last of the 12 appendices in this book, a social aesthetic manifesto entitled The Creation of an Overworld. Now this who's who in the Golden Tip is not complete. It is, as the title page shows, only the tip of the iceberg. But with this lineup, is it really any wonder, I ask you, that the Dutch edition, with one notable exception being the Haarlem Daily, has been completely boycotted by the Dutch mainstream press and media since it appeared in October 2008? Is it any wonder that none of the open letters were ever answered? In order to avoid that fate with this edition, and to close, or at least narrow somewhat, the credibility gap that is bound to have also arisen in the mind of the critical reader or listener in this case, this English edition has been enlarged with 2 documents. The first one is an internal memo from the Dutch national newspaper the Volkskrant in Amsterdam, proving that the press conference that Dr. Troublemaker held there as a scoop to divulge the true background to this kidnapping case, which had already made headlines around the world, did really take place there. The second document is a testimony given behind closed doors by Professor Dr. Rutter, president of Amnesty International, during Slobodan Mitric's trial in a rape case in 1988, to the effect that the latter, in other words Karate Bob, had always provided him with what he called golden information. This English edition of the Golden Tip is published, as was the Dutch one entitled De Gouden Tip, by the Wilhelm Institute Press in Amsterdam, for which Christian Eremos wrote a translator-publisher's foreword entitled J'accuse, in which he demands a thorough investigation of this case and a full exoneration of the author based on the recognition of his services rendered to the Dutch crown and to the world at large. end of this Wilhelm Institute press release.
Oh, to be